Hi, this is Camus, and this is my fourth video for Chess TV, and chessvideos.tv. And today I'd like to look at a line that I like to play against the Alekhine Defense. I, like many players, are very lazy about learning theory. I actually like to learn the openings I learn in pretty good detail, but I don't like to learn that many of them. So pretty much most of my repertoire has been chosen because they involve early forcing moves, and it cuts down the amount of time I have to study. I also tend to choose offbeat openings because I think it gives me good practical chances. Sometimes I choose lines that aren't necessarily 100% sound, but I like the element of risk, and I find that in a line such as this line against the Alekhine, that even though there's one line that leads to a disadvantage as white, it rarely occurs in practice, and the advantage I get from the advantage of surprise and the time I make up on the clock more than makes up for the slight risk. And even that line that has a disadvantage is not a loss by any means. It's an uphill battle, but it's still a battle, and white is not going to lose. So anyway, I'm just giving you a sort of warning that this is not 100% sound, but it is a good line. I've had a lot of practical results for it, particularly in blitz chess or against lower rated opponents. I wouldn't play it in a slow tournament game against a master. I think for one reason, they probably know the refutation line. But anyway, we'll talk about the bad line when we get to it. You can see how unlikely it is to be played against you by weaker players or players in a hurry. Okay, so as I said, it's the Alekhine Defense. This doesn't pop up that often, so I wanted to learn one line essentially that I could play against the Alekhine, and take the Alekhine player, who usually tends to be very specialized and have a lot of experience, to take them out of book. So anyway, let's get on with it. 1 e4, knight f6, e5, knight d5, d4, d6. And this is all standard theory. This, if you look at the statistics in ChessBase or other places, you find that a huge majority of the games reach this particular position. And a bishop c4, this is all theory. And again, overwhelming choice here is knight b6. There are other possible moves. Frankly, I don't even know what they are, but because this just seems to occur close to 100% of the time. Okay, now this next move is the key move in the position, e6. And this is a very interesting move. It offers a pawn sacrifice in many lines, and it seems to offer a piece sacrifice, but it's really a pseudo piece sacrifice, as we see when we'll get there. So let's discuss the lines in turn. Now, there are 4 replies that are seen in this position, and one of them we can dispose of quite quickly. f6, bishop b3, and really white should be able to maintain this pawn on e6. He can play d5, perhaps shore up that pawn, and that makes it impossible for, especially if he gets to play d5 and maybe follow it up with c4, it's impossible for him to develop any of his pieces, the queen, both bishops, and the knight. Also, white has a rather nasty-looking check on h5 that'll further weaken the king position. So anyway, white is in very good shape here, and I don't think you have to worry about f6. It's also a move that doesn't occur very often. So let's go back. Okay, more common, but not as common. I should say in this position, by far the most common move is knight takes bishop, and we'll talk about that last. So we'll talk about these other moves rather quickly on the way to that. So, okay, f takes e6, and white has 2 ways to play this position here. There may be more, but there's 2 ways that I know of anyway. You play bishop b3, and usually g6 is played to, it's practically the only way to get the black king bishop developed. Knight to f3, bishop to g7, castles, knight to c6, and now here I think I like c3. Rook e1 is also possible too, with play against the e pawn. He can play something like e5, exchange off. Let's see, he does something like this. I'd say white is down a pawn in this position, but it's going to be difficult for him to castle. White has the possibility of queen to f3, and that pressures not only the f7 pawn, but also the b7 pawn. And he can play f4. He can also play something like bishop h6. So anyway, he's down a pawn, but I think he's got some compensation in this line. And I should also mention that I've checked all this analysis with Crafty and Fritz, and all the positional evaluations I tend to agree with. I guess I'm a little more optimistic. A lot of the positions I feel are more favorable to white are given even perhaps a slight edge or equals. But as I said, my optimism probably comes from the practical results from playing this in blitz and against weaker opponents. So anyway, that disposes of that particular way of playing. So let's go back here. So instead of rook e1, you could play c3, which is the way I generally like to play, and that gives the bishop the option of it shores up the center. It gives the bishop the option of coming to c2. And it's just a slower way. You can play knight to g5, rook to e1, queen to e2, playing against this e pawn, or trying to exploit this hole on f7. In general, I think white has very good chances here, and he can often recover this pawn. So, all right, that's the bishop to b3 line. Let's go back. So after f takes e6, he can also play bishop to d3. Now this has a slightly different way that you can play it. Knight to c6, queen to h5, and the queen is forced to move right away. Naturally, he can't play g6 because of this, and this pawn is pinned against the rook. So you may find g6. It's the kind of thing that does pop up in blitz games, but there's no need for worry. So king to d7, knight to f3, queen to e8, and now white has a wide variety of moves. I've experimented with a couple of them. You can actually exchange on e8, but I prefer to keep the queens on because, after all, white is down a pawn and doesn't really want to reach an endgame. Probably best, I think that Crafty and Fritz have approved queen to b5, queen to g5, queen to g4, and queen to h4. Probably my preference would be for queen to g4. That puts pressure on the g pawn, although it's unlikely to have any effect there, but black does have to watch it. Puts pressure on this pawn. It shores up the defense of d4. And after castles and rook to e1, perhaps c3, you can see that the position of the king, blocking in this bishop and being centralized, is probably worth the pawn or close to it. Again, this is a good position. I don't mind playing this at all. I've had very good luck. Okay, so let's go back. So that's just a brief review of the possibilities after f takes e6. Okay. Now there's bishop takes e6, which leads to some similar positions. Bishop takes e6, f takes e6. Now the difference is that the white squared bishops are exchanged off. This is probably a little better for black than the lines where the pawn takes, because he doesn't have to worry about developing his bishop. It's already been developed, and so he's not quite as cramped. But the positions are good in this line for white too. Knight to f3, knight to c6, castles, e5, d takes e5, d takes e5, queen e2. Now, here, I'll stop at this line. It's very likely that white will be able to regain this pawn after queen d6, rook to e1, and I don't think that he can hold on to the pawn. And you can also see there's a gaping hole on f7, and white might be able to exploit that. Knight to g5, queen to f3 puts a lot of pressure on the f7 square. Also, the rook can come to d1 and harass the queen. She doesn't really have many options in this position. So all in all, the development is about equal. I think this central pawn, after white regains the pawn on e5, he's going to also be able to pressure the remaining e-pawn, which is isolated. All in all, I think this is a very good position for white, and there's nothing to fear here at all. So let's go back. This is one of the plans of playing. So that's the knight f3 plan after bishop takes after the bishops are exchanged on e6. Other possibility, excuse me, is knight to h3, followed by knight to c6, knight to g5, and here black could make a horrible blunder trying to. He sees obviously that. Okay, let's play queen to d7 first. He's trying to defend the pawn on e6. Say white could castle here and hope for the horrible blunder h6, which happens quite frequently, but especially in blitz play. But this is refuted by queen to h5 check, king to d8, and then knight to f7 wins. So let's move back here. Instead of castling, white could also play queen to f3, but this is not good. It looks like it would be crushing, but unfortunately it's not. So I don't recommend this line, not queen f3 immediately. Knight to d4, queen to f7, king to d8. And really, white has got no way to continue the attack. The pawn at c2 is under attack, and he has got no good way to defend that. So even after, when he retreats the queen, he's going to be able to threaten the fork on f7, but he doesn't have time because of this attack against c2. So this is not a favorable line for white. I only bring it up just to show that black does have counterplay, and that white should be on the lookout for things like this. Okay, so let's move back here. I think maybe best in this position is c3, once again, just solidifying the center. And then after this, white can feel free to play queen f3 or queen h5. Or, as in the other positions, just castle, play queen e2, rook e1, and pressure this the central pawn. All in all, these are fine positions. I look forward to these positions when I get them. Even though white is a pawn down. Virtually, I would say in most cases, white regains the pawn with a decent position. Okay, so let's go back to our earlier branch. Now, the last branch, knight to c4, is a very fun line. And I like this line for the psychological aspect of it, because it puts black under tremendous pressure right away. And he thinks he's winning a piece, perhaps, but the piece is actually easily recovered. So after knight takes c4, e takes f7, king takes f7. Now queen to f3 check. Remember not to go to h5. I always mix that up. There's a line, similar sort of line in the Cochrane Gambit, where queen must go to h5 to maintain its advantage, but not in this opening. Anyway, there are some lines where it works, but you basically have to go to f3. Okay, and black has two main replies here. King g8. This is followed by queen to d5, e6, queen takes c4. Okay, that's all I'm going to do with that line, because basically material is even, so White hasn't sacrificed anything in this position. His queen is in a useful central position. His development is actually slightly better than Black's, and the king is tucked away on g8, and that rook has got no easy way to develop. So all in all, I think that White has definitely got the edge here, maybe a small advantage. The trump that Black has is he's got a slightly better central pawns. But I think that the other considerations in the position outweigh Black's advantage in the center. Okay, so we're getting down to the nitty-gritty now. Here's a king to e8 is the other possible move after queen f3 check. And again, White plays queen h5 check. I suppose Black could go to d7, but it wouldn't help him. If he goes d7, then just queen b5 picks up the pawn. Most often, and logical, is g6. White plays queen b5 check anyway. And here he has two replies. Okay, and this is the part of the game that the part of the opening I was telling you about. Essentially, the reason that this opening has not appeared with more success in Master Chess is because of the reply queen to d7. However, in practical play, I can tell you, out of 9 out of 10 games, players will respond bishop to d7. Looks like a better move. It defeats the check and chases the queen with tempo. Queen takes queen to c4. And now, I think that White has a very good position here. Material is even. Black has been forced to move his king. Even though he's in his original position, he cannot castle from this position. He's stuck on e8. And there's this gaping hole on f7 that could be exploited. Knight to f3, knight to g5, castles, rook to e1. White has a very good position here, and there's no worries. Okay, so here's the fly in the ointment, and queen to d7. Looks, as I said, it's not the typical move that most players would play, but it is unfortunately the strongest move, and White gets a slight disadvantage after this. Well, maybe more than slight. He actually ends up a pawn down with not much in the way of compensation. So this is one reason why you might not like to play this line. This is the kind of line that might be found by a studious player in a slow game. So anyway, but it's not the end of the world. Okay, so queen to c4, and here's the move that gives Black the advantage. Queen to g4, and it attacks the g pawn. Now White can defend this, queen to d5, but after c6, he has no way to defend both d4 and the g pawn. He can't go to e4, for instance, just be queen takes queen. He can try something like h3, c takes d5, h takes g4, bishop to g4, f3. And he's down a pawn. He has some slight compensation in the doubled pawns of Black. But all in all, this is not a great position for him. But you can see there's still plenty of play left in the position. All the pieces have to find their squares yet, and they may find good squares. There's also this open file here, which may be useful too. So White is certainly not dead, but this is the risk that you entail when you play this line, is that you may run up into a position like this. But I have actually won games and drawn games from similar positions. I don't think it's that much to worry about, especially if you're playing it in casual chess. Okay, so going back, another way to play it is knight to e2, queen takes g2, rook to g1, queen takes h2, and then queen takes h7. Okay, so Black is still a pawn up. White is sort of making threatening motions in the direction of the white king. And one thing to remember too, another positional compensation here is that even though the king is on his original square, he's already moved, so he cannot castle in this position. So that's a slight positional favor for White. But all in all, this is difficult. Maybe I think the other line might be a little bit better. Although White is threatened to play something like bishop to f4, and he can develop some play. As I said, is not anywhere near the end of the world for white. He's essentially a pawn down. But as I said, and I've said repeatedly, it's a risk that I'm more than willing to take. And I've only run into players who've played these lines once or twice, and they generally tend to be strong players. The very first time I played this in tournament play, I played a master, and he happened to know the refutation. So I was sort of discouraged at that point because he instantly blew away my careful home preparation. But as I found out, he was one of the few players to actually play it. And the other lines I think are very good for white. Now, I'll leave you with one last observation. When you go check this position out, let's go back to the key position here. Yeah, this is the key position after e6. If you search this on ChessBase or ChessBase Online or whatever, you'll find that white does not have tremendous results with this game, with this line. And one reason you don't see it, I actually went through virtually every game with Fritz and Crafty, and aside from the bad line that we just talked about, white was doing just well in nearly all of the games. It was only a tactical error that caused white to lose in the games that he lost. So Fritz and Crafty liked white's positions in nearly all of these resulting lines, with the exception of that last line with the queen interposition. So anyway, once again, it's a tricky line. Your opponent's not likely to know this or have played it very often, so it gives you the advantage. There's not a lot of theory to know. I mean, pretty much what I've shown you is pretty much all there is to the line, at least in terms of known theory. Some of this is my own analysis. Unfortunately, I wish I had some games. I've played lots of games in this line, but since I just switched computers and I'm on a Windows format computer, all my stuff is compatible with old Mac software, so I don't have records of these games. I wish I could play them for you, but because, as I said, there's not very many games online to give you inspiration. But I would advise trying this out in unrated blitz games and see how it feels. I think you'll like it. It's a fun game to play, and it puts the opponent in a psychological disadvantage right from the early moves. Thanks very much. I hope you enjoyed it. Feel free to let me know if what you think about my presentation, if any criticisms or suggestions for improvement. I'm more than happy to entertain those.